It's taking a few seconds to start.
So there's a list of people on the side. Are those just people that are actually joined?
Okay. Well, we are live now.
Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Calculating General Assistance Program Work Plan and Budget Cost session. I'm just going to give a second for any stragglers to join the presentation. So let's just give it a second. If you want to say hello in the chat, that'd be great. Hey, Rob.
Hello to you too. I know, he abandoned us.
Okay, it looks like people are coming in. I'm going to go ahead and start. So I wanted to welcome everyone to our session. I did want to say we have two presenters here, Camille Merchant from Rincon and me from the EPA Region 9 Tribal Branch. Our other two presenters, Veronica, Swann, and Frank Spurgeon, had last minute issues and aren't able to attend and help present. So we missed them. But we're going to go ahead and move forward with our presentation. And we still have lots of great information. And we're able to get their copies of their presentations or their samples also probably at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat while we're talking. We'll come back and look at them. And we're happy to see everyone here virtually. Wishing we were in Lake Tahoe, but at least we're able to see each other virtually. So I wanted to give everyone a second, just in case you've been on Teams, or not Teams, but this new platform for the conference this year. And if you've been listening to sessions all year, feel free to stand up, take a stretch while you're looking at your monitor. We want to make sure everyone's moving around. So I'll just talk a little bit about our session goals. Today, we want to demonstrate some options for you to develop your work plan and component costs and your FTE estimates. And we're going to be looking at a sample Region 9 gap workbook. We're going to also be just looking at a few examples of some more simplified costing tools that you might want to just start out with if you're not ready to tackle the gap workbook. And also looking at some examples that specific tribes have been using that they want to share with you. So we want to take a second here for you to put in your in the chat, maybe answering some of these questions here. If you use a costing tool, why you think it might be important to use a costing tool, and what are the benefits. So I'm just going to give a minute here for people to type in some comments that we'll look at and hopefully gain some good information from each other on this. So let me give it just a minute here. Why do you think it would be good to use a costing tool? Or feel free to answer, I don't use one now, or I have one that I'm using, but I just want to learn a little bit more about options. We just definitely kind of want to get a feel for who's here and kind of some information about what you're already using. Looks like everyone's being shy here. Okay, a few comments. Tim Wilhite, thank you. To think through and derive good estimates. Melissa says better budgeting. Also work plan FTE which is your full-time equivalency or your hours you're developing to figure out how many hours you need to spend on your work plan activities. So comparing that to your budget. Thank you, Mercedes. Rob Roy says defensible. I wish you guys could speak, so I will speak for you here. And I assume that means, Rob, like if you're asked questions by your project officer or by anyone else, how are you coming up with these costs? You have examples of how you've actually done that to derive your budgets and your work plans. Leonard Bruce is saying, we use one. It's super useful to help figure out how much time and effort we're putting into a commitment and component. And that's a great comment because it's also good to use, as I'm reading that, on the front end to budget, and maybe even during the year or towards the end of the year as you're looking at your actual budgets and your actual costs that are getting charged to the grant, to go back and look at those estimates you had to make sure you think that they're in line with what your estimates were up front. And it might lead to some discussions with your project officer about why you need to do a budget revision or a work plan revision. So it's definitely useful in those cases. Leonard once again says help with salaries. So I assume that's to know how many hours you're charging for each person and what your personnel costs are going to be in your budget. And Ryan says, because EPA advocates it. Yeah. So thank you. But we have heard from a lot of tribes that they're interested in identifying, how do we come up with our hours? What do some of these questions are asked, they're not sure how to do it. So we want to provide you some tools here that you can use. So thanks for your input. Once again, some of the benefits definitely are developing your component cost is required and commitment costs are optional, but we highly encourage them for you to develop your cost at the commitment level. And it helps you develop your budget detail. It helps support your personnel needs when you're asking for a certain amount for personnel hours in your work plan and in your budget. You can, if anyone is questioning your costs, you can say, this is how I came up with my numbers. And lots of times, once we hear that supporting information, it totally makes sense to everyone. So it's great to have that supporting information available. And then it folds into supporting your total funding request and your total needs that you have in your work plan. And then it helps through the negotiation process of a gap proposal, because when you're working with your project officer, there might be questions on how you came up with numbers for a project you want to complete. And you've already thought through that. So it's definitely easier to go through that negotiation process once you have that information. Do you have anything to add, Camille?
No, I think it's also good for checking your math and being able to calculate things reliably. It keeps you from having to spin your wheels trying to figure out where discrepancies lie. I know at the end of the day, my math skills are not what they are at the beginning. And it just helps you visualize how you're putting the costs together and what you're taking into consideration. It's a lot easier than trying to sit there and go, well, I have no idea where to start. So.
Great, thank you, Camille. I just saw a question pop up from Mercedes that she can only see her own comments. So David, if you can help her answer that question. I see Tim Wilhite said he can see all the comments in the chat. Okay, so we just wanted a reminder as you're developing your work plan. A work plan does have certain required elements, and these are required in the regulations. So when we're reviewing, EPA's reviewing your work plans, we definitely make sure your work plan contains these required elements. And they include a component description and your outcomes, gap capacity indicators for gap work plans, commitment descriptions that we like you to provide more detail about who is going to do what, how and when you'll complete the activity. That's what you need to make sure you put enough detail in your commitment descriptions. And then also you're required to enter your FTE or your work years or your work hours. We use those terms interchangeably at the component level, but we also encourage you to develop them at the commitment level and let them fold up to the component so you have that breakdown. And the cost by component is required and optional at the commitment level. I'd say most of the work plans I work with, grantees are providing the commitment level costs, which are really helpful when you're evaluating the allowable, allocable, and especially the reasonableness of a cost, which is something that EPA has to determine in approving your work plan. So that's why sometimes we're asking for more information if you don't provide your breakdown at the commitment level. Also, your outputs and deliverables are required. But during this session, we're just going to talk about these highlighted sections. You're developing your work years and your component or commitment level costs. So this is just an example, hoping you can see it, of a GAP work plan template. And this is just a sample to show how your components are required at the component level. Your information is just a general description of the component. Your environmental results or outcomes or indicators should be at the component level. But at the commit and the estimated cost and the estimated FTE. And these are highlighted here in the section. So it is a requirement for your work plan. And this also shows how a commitment is written, that you also can include the estimated cost of the commitment and the estimated FTE for each commitment. So that's how you can describe it and show it in your work plan. So we're going to take about 10 minutes here to show a video that was developed by one of my coworkers, Tim Wilhite. We've done some webinars in the past on how to use the EPA costing tool. It is on our website. And so he did a great job walking through the tool. So it's about 10 minutes here. We're just going to walk through this. And it should provide you some great information, and we'll take questions on it after the video is over with. So here goes.
Hello, I am Tim Wilhite, and I will demonstrate how a commitment cost estimator can be used to calculate values for all work plan commitments. Ensure those values are always the same cost as shown in your work plan and budget details.
I'm sorry, I clicked something I shouldn't have.
Hello, I am Tim Wilhite, and I will demonstrate how a commitment cost estimator can be used to calculate values for all work plan commitments. Ensure those values are always the same cost as shown in your work plan and budget details, and show how efficient the tool is if it becomes necessary to make changes to variables such as wage, fringe, and indirect rate. We'll be referring to the spreadsheet you see on your screen by many names such as tool, sheet, tab, cost estimator, and perhaps more. Where did we get the idea for a tool like this? At the annual Tribal EPA conferences for at least the last 4 years, tribal presenters have demonstrated how to use Excel spreadsheets to estimate commitment costs. We took note of how well those presenters put the tools to use and how many tribes were interested in developing cost estimators for themselves. We want to thank all the tribal employees who shared their cost estimators with us and took the time to demonstrate them at annual conferences. We tried to incorporate the best features of the tribal tools we reviewed while developing the spreadsheet before you. So let's jump into the cost estimator spreadsheet and see how it works. The tables at the top here are what we call setup tables, and they can save you a lot of time, particularly this one right here. It allows you to insert hourly rates and indirect cost rates and fringe rates that can be changed and make big changes in your whole spreadsheet. We'll demonstrate that later. So let's start looking at the sheet and realize first and foremost that it's kind of color-coded. It's color-coded so that we could show where data stems from, where it comes from, and where we calculate it and where we enter it. And we'll go through that and talk about that a little bit as we go through this. Let's start from left and go right. Let's just start over here in these orange columns, the commitment descriptions. And the thing about this is the text here is not written here. It's actually written in the work plan. So this is a case, this is a column. That actually grabs data some other place. So this data right here is grabbed from the work plan, and we'll pop into the work plan and demonstrate that right here. You can see the text starts with the director and ends with 9:30 a.m. Let's go see where that comes from. So we go into the work plan up here on 1.1, and you can see that this is the same text here. So we get this text from the work plan because this is the best place to type it. And we pull it into the cost estimator right here using a simple reference formula. You can see up top here where I'm waving the cursor. It basically, the formula says to go grab data from the FY22 draft work plan at C7, field C7. And we just demonstrated where field C7 was. Next, let's look at these blue columns here, these dark blue columns. And the good news here is that the data that you enter into the columns is the only data you have to enter in the whole sheet. The rest of the data is either calculated or pulled from elsewhere. So let's see how this works. In commitment 1.1, hypothetically, the director is going to spend 40 hours accomplishing 1.1. To get to the director wages, it's really simple. You just multiply the 40 hours by the hourly rate for the director up here, and you come up with the wage. To get from wage to fringe, you just simply take the wage here and you multiply it by the fringe rate for the director. You can have different fringe rates for different employees if that's the way your tribe is set up. And you repeat that process for the manager and the assistant, which brings us to basically, and just again, all of these things in light blue, that's free. You don't have to enter that data. That stuff is calculated for you. So that brings us to this total personnel column right here. And that's just real simple. For commitment 1.1, it's just simply the director wages and the director fringe, the manager wages and the manager fringe.
No.
So it sounds like some people lost sound.
Oh, you're back. I can hear you again.
Do you, let me try and start it again right here and see if it pops back.
Simply
Yep, it's back.
gotten by adding everything from total personnel over to equipment. So you do that to get your individual commitment costs. And then to get the component cost, the overall component cost, you just add everything below it right there. The same pattern holds true for the total component FTE. It's everything below it, the individual commitment FTE. So how do you get a commitment FTE? You just simply, in this case, you add the 40 hours that the director is going to spend on 1.1 to the 100 hours that the manager is going to spend on it. And in this case, the assistant's not going to work on 1.1. And you get the total of those and you divide them by 2080, as you can see up here in the formula. 2,080 hours is considered a full work year or full-time equivalent. Full-time equivalent, that's where the term FTE comes from. These are nice numbers to get in this cost estimator because they're actually required in your work plan. You have to have a component cost and a component FTE in each of your work plan components. Most tribes are providing also in their work plans the commitment costs, but what's required by reg are these two right here. That'll take us down to, I'm going to zip up this one right here just so we can keep a little bit of stuff in view, but it brings us down to these tables down in here, and there's nothing special about these tables. These are quality assurance tables. These are items right here, for instance, that are in the budget detail. I can find these items in the budget detail. And these are the costs for each of those items in this particular tab. So if I want to go see if my spreadsheet is working correctly, I can compare these numbers that we have for each of these items here and go manually compare them to the budget detail. We could also rig up an automated way to do that. So that's just a QA check to make sure that the things are linked. Here's one. I was just, trying to QA how I did the math for indirect to make sure that that was all working correctly. And here's one here. You guys probably realize that a lot of spreadsheets are set up to add things together, north and south, to get totals, up and down or north and south. But you can QA that from an east and west perspective because everything that adds from east to west is also supposed to come up with the same total. So that was just another check I built into it, and there's nothing fancy about that. People can put their own checks in. So that brings us back to our promise that we were going to show you how this autofill table up here can save you a lot of time. So let's pretend, and this happens quite often, that you get way into negotiating a budget with the EPA, and then you get a call from finance director or administrator saying your indirect rate went from 43.13%, which is shown up here, to 52%, and you need to redo your budget. That could take a lot of time if you had to do it manually. But if you set your budgets, cost estimators, and your work plans up in a spreadsheet like this, changes like that are actually a breeze, and we'll demonstrate that now. Before we do that, I want to call your attention to the component cost over here. It's $25,654 right now. And when we change our indirect cost to 52%, we're going to expect that to change, and we're going to expect the total to change from 48,257 to something else as well. So let's go make a change over here to 52% and see if it works. So as we change to 52%, this table updates, all these numbers in the table update, and you come up to 27,242, and you come up with a total of 50,923. That in and of itself is pretty nice. You updated all of these figures in here updated. But let's go see if it actually updated in the work plan. And we go right here And we see that the component cost for the component 1 is 27,242, which matches the cost estimator. The FTE is the same as well. And then we can check the budget detail. And sure enough, the budget detail, especially when we go down here and look at the total, 5923, it updated too. So if you set yourself up, your work plan, your cost estimator, and your budget in a spreadsheet like this, it takes a little bit of investment, but it saves a lot of time in the long run. And so if you want to jump into something like this and give it a try, give your project officer a call, and we'll see what we can do to help you get into it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. And Tim is online with us. So he did a great job on that, demonstrating how to use the gap cost calculator. And once again, as I said, that's on our Region 9 website. And so you're happy to use it and look at it. And I know I work with tribes that have very different levels of experience using Excel. So for some, some parts of this might be very complex. For some people, they just input their numbers and it's a whiz. So there are ways to, simplify it, maybe not link all the numbers. It takes more work for you then to just double check all your numbers against the budget detail and the work plan and your calculators. So you just have to spend more time when they're not linked. So I would say we started with very simple cost calculators, and they became more complex as we realized there were ways to ensure better QA on the calculator workbook. So I just wanted to show this next slide to show this is an example of how we've been asked before, how you come up with hours in a work plan. Like, how do you know for each commitment how many hours it's going to take? Like, if you just say to do our quarterly reports, it's 48 hours. Like, where does that number come from? And this is a way for you to use a simplified sheet to just come up with your hours by commitment, where you really think through, like, to do quarterly reports. In this example, we've already thought out. So the coordinator has to spend 1 day per report, which is 8 hours, times 4 reports, plus 2 days for the joint evaluation. So that's how that number was derived. You can see to do expenditure reports, the coordinator spends 1 hour a month getting monthly expenditures from the finance office and then going through them and reviewing them. For travel arrangements, the coordinator is going to take 3 RTOC trips, so if that's a week-long trip, 40 hours times 3, plus your any planning costs you have to do for your travel, things like that. So this is a way to just jot down how you're coming up with your hours, and that helps feed into your work plan. And once we really started talking to people about how they came up with their hours, in some cases, they seemed too high and people recalculated them, but also in a lot of cases, they were too low. So once people thought through exactly how long it was going to take to do all of their activities, counting, their meetings, their research, their, meetings with community, planning those meetings, meeting with the council, planning with the council, planning for those council meetings. Sometimes once you really think about all the hours, you need more time. And that's why sometimes you probably feel frustrated that you can't get all your work done because you're not really accounting for all the hours and all the time it takes you to do each commitment. So we really want people to think through it. And then there might be some times where EPA says, those hours seem really high. Can you explain it? And then you've already got the explanation in your back pocket here to tell us how you came up with those hours. So this is just a very simplified sheet to do that if you weren't going to go through that whole cost calculator, or this could also feed into your cost calculator. The next thing I wanted you to look at is, or to show you, is estimating the cost at the component level. This is also showing you how you would input all of this across in a very, very simplified sheet. So you would come up with those hours you need to spend on updating your integrated solid waste management plan. And you've developed that using that prior sheet we just looked at. So you have 10 hours for the director and 100 hours for the technician. And then what else is going to go along with that? And this commitment is just abbreviated. Believe me, we would definitely want to see more details about all the activities you need to do to get that update completed. But you might also say, oh, I'm also going to need $100 of supplies. And over here, you have an assumption of where you came up with that. So I need to buy a camera to visually document all the solid waste needs. So I'm going to put that into my supplies for that commitment. And travel, oh, I need to drive around and document the sites we have. So I'm going to have some mileage rates I'm going to have to put into my budget to complete this commitment. I don't need equipment or a contractor, but I also want to go to some solid waste training. I'm going to be able to get it online, and the registration fee is $100. So you build that in. So you build in all the costs across for your commitment, and then you would need to total all these up to get to your component level cost. But knowing how you're coming up with the component level is really difficult to do unless you really do this itemization at the commitment level. Because as you saw in Tim's spreadsheet, every commitment had a different cost. So you really need to just look and see how much effort each commitment is going to take. It also helps as you're reviewing your budgets later on and doing your quarterly reports to see, did I budget my hours correctly? Now you might look at your quarterly and say, wow, we're spending way more than 100 hours or 110 total hours on developing our solid waste management plan. So I need to revise my work plan and move some costs around. And I might not be able to do something else because I need to spend more time on this activity. So it's a good way to have a budgeting tool that you look at and assess throughout the year. This is just another sample of using a simplified costing tool. This one, in the example here, only totals at the component level. But as you can see, it totals down instead of across. You still have the hours and the costs across. In this sheet, it doesn't include anything in that total column, but we would definitely encourage you to use those totals across so you're sure that you're developing your component cost correctly and really looking at each commitment. See. And just to go back to how Tim was talking about developing your budget in the video, all of those costs feed into developing your detailed gap budget that you need to submit with your work plan and your application. So here's where you itemize, I'm sorry if this print is small, but you itemize your hours for the director, the assistant, the technician, and your project officer might say, well, how'd you come up with those hours? That seems really high. You have all that calculation already done in your cost calculator. You can go back and say, it's because of this, 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 or this. So that's how we want to make sure you're developing your budget. Your travel costs, we want to make sure those are all included in your work plan commitments in addition to hours. And this is the itemization of I'm going to the Region 9 conference. So here's what I'm estimating the airfare is and the lodging and how many days and per diem is going to be required, or any travel costs for training you're going to take, or RTOC meetings. Itemize out your equipment, which would also be linked and in your cost calculator or costing tool to a specific commitment that I need this equipment to do this work in my work plan. We definitely want to be able to see those links. So just a quick little flow chart of the example of the process we're trying to talk about. So what we like to see first is you create your work plan commitments. So you start with your work plan and say, here's the work I need to do at the commitment level. And then you use a costing tool to develop how many hours it's going to take you to complete each one of those commitments and what other costs do you need to complete those equipments. Are there travel costs? Are there equipment needs? Contractual needs, whatever you need associated with that commitment. And then from that, you can use those numbers, you already have them down, so you can just plug those into your budget detail by category using the cost calculator information. And then you add the commitment totals to come up with a component level costs, and you can plug those right into your work plan. And most work plans I also see still have the commitment level costs identified in the work plans that are submitted. So we have an example of a different type of calculator that Camille is actually using at Rincon, and she does a great job identifying all of her costs. And she's going to do a hands-on demonstration of hers. And then we'll come back to the questions if that works for everybody. So I'm going to stop sharing and let Camille start sharing.
Okay. I think that's working.
I see it.
See that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, this is how we start with the work plan, and we write out what the component is and the capacity indicators and some of the description before we even come up with the costs. And then we get down to the commitment level. And so for the component for which is the office administration and program planning, we have, hang on here, we have a few commitments. I think there's 4. Quarterly reporting and compliance, and the work plan development and revisions. And we have a short description. We don't touch the cost because that is by formula. And we list out what the end dates are, when the quarterly reports are due, and who's going to be working on them, and what the outputs and deliverables are. So we get basically organized, so we know what each of the commitments and components are. And so we continue on, and we have different components. We get to outreach, and which includes website updates and different events like cleanup day and recycling day and Earth Day, and meetings and trainings. Well, you know, so much for Lake Tahoe. Oh well, next year maybe. And actually this is this year, but anyway, guess we should update that. And let's see, what else do we have in here? All sorts of stuff. Solid waste management. We go all the way down, and trainings and developing plans and that sort of thing. And then we go back to the next tab, which is the budget outline. And the budget outline is essentially where I start thinking about what goes into everything. And this is where I do the majority of the work. And so, for instance, if you figure the number of hours, and the rates are have all been changed to protect the guilty. So let's see, the number of hours. If we put hours in here, it does the FTE calculation. It does the extensions. So if you put in different hours, these are kind of random, and you come out with your commitment cost. And so these are things that are basically hours. They're not, we don't have any supplies, no travel. And so they're fairly simple. We can just put in things, hours, and it will continue to add them up for us. And I don't know. Some of these are just funky, but we have 4 commitments, and so we're putting the hours in here, and we end up with a subtotal for the component up here, which is adding these numbers together. And so we get a component cost from the commitment costs, and then we can continue on and put in all sorts of hours. I'm just coming up with random stuff. And when we get to supplies, we have other ones. What we do too with the wages and the fringe breakdown is we have another sheet here, and it will add up all the hours that you're putting into this sheet here. So it adds up all these hours all the way down, and it gets a total for each position, calculates out the FTE, and this is for the whole work plan, and it extends out your wages as well as your fringe, and you can put in different fringe rates. So if some people have medical, some people don't, because their spouse has it, just different things, you may have different rates. And so you can calculate them out separately, and it totals them, and you end up with your totals. And this is a check just to make sure that the wages plus the fringe is the rate per hour. And this is the rate that's used in this worksheet here. We take the wage plus the fringe together. And so this calculates out all your labor costs. And you go to the next one is for the component breakdown. And this one is taking the numbers that we entered into the budget outline, and it automatically puts them in here. So you have every position, the hours are automatically entered so that you know that they're consistent, and it totals them up. Again, this is kind of the personnel end of things. And you've got your fringe, and then you got your wage plus fringe. And if you have other components like supplies and contractors, we come out to the detailed budget. And again, these numbers are taken from this budget outline and automatically placed in here. And this is what we hand in with our work plan. And so we come down to our supplies, and here we have our events, and over here we list out what all the supplies are, and we figure out what the totals are, and we put it in here, and it is placed in here. This is the same 2,000. It's taken from the detailed sheet and put into the component breakdown. And we go through with all the different events. And if we have travel and training, we have all the breakdowns here of how we came up with the totals. And each of these totals are placed in the component breakdown under the right category. So under travel, you have some funds that are taken from this sheet here, because this is where the greatest breakdown is. And if you have others and you have disposal costs or whatever, you can place them in here. And again, they will be imported into here so that we have disposal over here. And the final detailed budget is usually handed in with our work plan. And the grand total is down here, which is interesting. I just put in random numbers, but, and there's a check here, just to make sure that you're coming out with the right numbers. The odd time you'll get a rounding error, but that's about it, where you're off by $1 or something like that. And that's just from rounding. But apart from that, it's pretty quick, and you can make adjustments that are carried through on all the worksheets so that you don't waste time changing every single worksheet and worrying about transcription errors or just interpolating numbers. So that's what we do.
Thanks, Camille. So you were showing how at the bottom that check number compares the total of the work plan with the budget you have right above, right? That number came from your work plan?
Yeah, and that's just making sure that we don't have any errors with the formulas or anything, that we're just doing a check to make sure that this final number is the same.
And I think that's one really important thing, because we do EPA looks at, does your work plan total match your budget total? And you'd be surprised, most often it doesn't match. And that's when we need to come back to you and say, wait, these numbers don't match, or they don't add up. And, you know, sometimes you haven't included all the costs you need in your work plan or your budget. The hours aren't adding up. So this is another benefit to using a costing tool, because you can really check your numbers and manage them and make sure they add up, that you're not shorting yourself or overcounting hours or costs.
And in the work plan itself, we have these numbers come from the budget. And so they are totaled from the other sheets. And so we have our commitment costs as well as our component costs and the FTE already calculated out. So we don't have to do it again. And it shows up in the work plan too. So it's a nice, concise summary where we're not just taking our numbers and doing that. Yeah, the Excel round function is a good way of doing it too.
And I think, Camille, you explained to me before that you started out with a simplified version and then gradually grew into linking numbers. I know sometimes these all these linked sheets can be intimidating, but I think it's just good to think about starting somewhere,
right,
and using some kind of calculator to start determining your costs and your needs.
And they're very simple things. If they're taking their numbers from different sheets, it's not doing anything too complicated. It's just literally taking it from one cell to another, and you just highlight the one that you're after and it'll take it from there. And it'll tell you which sheet it's taking it from and which cell it's taking it from. So it's pretty simple once you get the formatting of it straight. It's pretty simple to do that. And it saves you a lot of time and effort. And once you trust it and you trust that the formulas are good, it's quite quick.
And I think this has really helped you in the past when, especially say during FY20 COVID hit, some commitments couldn't be done. Some of the cleanups where there might have been a big lump sum tied to where you'd look, the middle of the year and go, we're not going to be able to do this year. So you can just move those costs. You can add something new that you want to do in a new and different way remotely or something like that, and make those adjustments easily.
And you could take just portions of it. Let's say you were going to just take the disposal costs and spread them out. Well, it's pretty easy to remove it from the sheet and place it in other components. So at least we know that what the total is supposed to be, so we can get there, add some, spread it out if we want, or create another commitment.
I would think also sometimes you're doing your budget so far ahead. Like, of course, right now we're going to be asking for your FY23 in January. And lots of times hourly wages change every year.
Yeah.
So you're budgeting without knowing what salaries are going to be next year. So it's, this would be really good to use now to submit your application, but really look at it once the year is starting to make sure the numbers are accurate.
Yeah.
If you've got a salary increase approved for all your staff by the council, that's going to eat up part of your budget or your indirect changes, things like that. So you're going to need to come back to us and say, I don't have enough money now to do all the work I'd planned to do just because salary increases or indirect increases. So it really helps you think through and rebudget things and have a justification on why you can't finish the work or things like that.
Right. Or to decide if you can cut down on the hours just enough to make up the difference. At least you know what the total was. And if you can get close to that total again without taking away too many hours. I mean, if you're just talking a few hours, sometimes it's easy enough to tweak the hours rather than give up a whole commitment.
Right. So let me just check quickly the chat box.
Okay.
Looks like Tim, thank you, has been answering a lot of the questions. Let's see. Sorry, the sound cut out in the middle. I think I might have put myself on mute because I thought I was hearing an echo, and I think I did that. So if you're working on a session later in the conference, don't put yourself on mute. Let's see. Robert, I asked, could you put a link to the costing tool and video in the chat or add to the session details? I did put a link to the EPA Region 9 webpage for GAP. I didn't find it right away when I was looking for it in preparation of this, but I had to go to the gap notification link and it's in there. So I gave you the link to the gap notification link and you'll see in there, it'll say something like gap workbook template and example link. So there's the link in there. The video, we've had some issues trying to publish it. So I'm happy to email it to you if you want a copy of it. I put my information in the chat. If you want a copy of the video, I will just email it to you. Let's see, Melissa said, what happens if you calculate maybe 100 hours to complete a task, but the task is incomplete at the end of the year? It took longer than you expected. I know you can ask for a no-cost extension, but can you also put in your next year work plan additional hours? So let's see, Tim answered, if you underestimate time it takes to complete something and make that clear in your reports or verbal conversations, POs can adjust the value or credit you're given for a task. So yeah, what I would just encourage, like Tim said, but try not to wait till the end of the year or after the year is over. Hopefully you're using this to look throughout the year. And as you're doing your quarterly reports, we really want you to be monitoring this, seeing if your estimates are off and trying to reaching out to us to renegotiate work plans or budgets during the year. We definitely want to do that. That's an option. Your budgets and work plans are not set in stone. We know their estimates. We know their planning tools. So if you see something is taking longer or you've been pulled in another direction and can't complete something, please talk to us. A really good time is maybe after your second quarter report, when you're halfway through the year. Really look and see where things are. Definitely your third quarter report. It's harder for us to do at the very end of the year when you've already finished the whole year and we have to go back and do an old renegotiation. So talk to your project officer. We're really open to it. We don't want to cause problems. We want to help you accomplish what you can do and what you need to do. Let's see, my links are in the chat. Tim has some comments on how to use the spreadsheet. He is a whiz at doing that, as you could see from, he helped in the development of the cap cost calculator. So he's very helpful and I can pull him in, or feel free to email him. Thank you, Tim, if you have questions on using the cost calculator. So I think that's all we have today, and we're right 2 minutes over at time. I did want to recommend that tomorrow at 3 o'clock, 3 to 3:50, Tim and Destiny are going to be doing a session on gap work plan writing tips. So they'll be looking at how you develop your work plan commitments and really diving into the work plan itself. So I encourage you to attend that session in addition to the other gap sessions that are going on. So there is one question, Camille, that one person is asking if you'd be willing to share your Excel workbook.
I can. I can't see the chat anymore. The chat disappeared when I stopped sharing the screen.
Really? I will put your email in the chat.
Okay.
Or feel free. Do you want to read your email right now?
Sure. It's cmerchant@rincon-nsn.gov. So just drop me an email. It's probably the easiest way.
So it's cmerchant@rincon.nsn.gov?
No. cmerchant@rincon-nsn.gov.
Okay, so it should be in the chat now. So feel free to reach out to either one of us if you have any questions on the presentation or have any follow-up you'd like. And thanks for attending.
Yep.
Thank you, Pam, Camille.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a
See
great
ya.
night.
Have a good one.